Why don't we go live and we can start.
Okay, we're live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the December 7th IAASB CAG meeting, our final meeting. I'd like to welcome the participants. Joining this meeting also will be Tom Stevenson, of course, our chair, the IAASB chair. Josephine Jackson, the vice IAASB chair, is here, and Galen Hansen, the IAASB chair. We also have our PIOB observer, Sandra Peters. Welcome, Sandra. In addition to our members, we have our official observers and our public observers who will be joining us here as well as on the YouTube channel. A few of our members are unable to attend and have sent their regrets. And we also wanted to, of course, start off any meeting with a discussion and approval of the minutes. So if you look at agenda item A, those are the draft minutes that were distributed on November the 15th. And I wanted to see if I have an approval for those minutes. Looks like I don't have any indication. Mario you gave the thumbs up, and we will approve the minutes. So thank you for that. We're next.
Yes. Excuse me.
Right. Okay. Are you good? Next, we're going to go to agenda item B, and that is the listed and public interest entity. We're fortunate that Sue is here. Sue Amman, I'll give it to you.
My apologies. And the when Michelle hit the button, it took over my whole screen. So it then I then lost all the other things that I got open. So right, we're in business.
We have you back.
Yeah,
that's
good.
That's great.
Fine. Okay. So listed entity and PI. This is track 2. You'll recall that we had a number of discussions around track 1 in the past, which has now been approved. So before we start, obviously just want to recognise the work of the task force. We have task force members Chun-Wei Chu, Fernando Ruiz, Susan Jones, and we have a correspondent member of the task force, Sung Nam. We also have a fantastic staff team who've been doing all the work behind the scenes. So Kalina and Isabel, and Lily has been helping us with oversight there. Something I know is very close to the CAG's heart, and you often comment on this, is that we have been very, very mindful of coordination with IAASB. As I say, we have a correspondent member in the task force, and we have a lot of staff coordination that's going on, and that will probably come out in some of the later points that I speak to as well. So Michelle, if we go to the first slide, please. So just a reminder really of the timeline and the key milestones that we have for track 2. The first draft of the task force proposals for the narrow scope amendments for track 2 was discussed with the board in December 2022, so a year ago. The board broadly supported the proposals, but they provided some directional comments, obviously, to be considered by the PI task force in finalising the narrow scope amendments. And in March 2023, I spoke with this group as well about the proposals that we had for track 2. Since the December 2022 board meeting, the PI task force and the staff have continued to develop the narrow scope amendments for track 2, and we've taken into consideration the feedback that we got from the board and from the CAG representatives. We have monitored jurisdictional developments gaining information from national standard setters and IFAC member organisations to understand whether jurisdictions have extended or plan to extend the differential requirements for listed entities in their national jurisdictions, because as we were doing this case-by-case exercise, it's helpful to have that background information as to what is happening in a cross-section of jurisdiction. One other piece of information that we sought was how frequently a review of historical financial statements is undertaken, and that was to inform the consideration for the revision of ISRE 2400 revised. And of course, we continue to engage in coordination activities with IAASB on the topic of listed entity and PIEs. So I was going to say in December, next week, the board will be presented for approval of the proposed narrow scope amendments to the ISQMs, the ISAs and ISRE 2400 revised as a result of the revisions to the definitions of listed entity and PIE in the IAASB code. If the exposure draft is approved, it's anticipated that it will be published in January 2024 and will be out for a 90-day comment period. And the expected approval of the final pronouncement is anticipated to be December 2024. As we've developed that timeline, the IAASB has been mindful about coordinating the possible effective date for this ED and the revised standards on fraud and going concern, given that those projects are considering, amongst other things, possible changes to enhance the transparency in the auditor's report. So we're conscious of the number of changes that there might be coming through together on the auditor's report. Next slide, please. So this is a recap of the project objectives for track 2 and just mapping these to how they support the public interest. In addressing the actions of the project, due consideration was provided to the qualitative standard setting characteristics of the public interest framework as criteria to assess the responsiveness of the narrow scope amendments to the public interest. And then in the explanatory memorandum that I think you've had as a draft as part of the paper, Appendix 2 to the explanatory memorandum sets out a table that maps the proposed narrow scope of revisions to the standard setting actions included in the project proposal as the actions directly related to the project objectives to support public interest. So Appendix 2 to the explanatory memorandum also highlights what qualitative standard setting characteristics were at the forefront or of most relevance when we were determining how to address each proposed action. Next slide, please. So I'm going to dig into the major proposals that there are in the exposure draft for track 2. And this slide gives you an overview of the significant matters that I'll talk through in a second. So we have the objective for establishing differential requirements for PIEs, the definitions of PIEs and publicly traded entity, the differential requirements in the ISQMs and the ISAs, and the revisions to ISRE 2400 revised. So next slide, please. So starting off with the objective for establishing differential requirements for the PIEs, one of the goals was around having a common objective across IAASB standards and the IAASB codes as an overarching principle for establishing when differential requirements are to be set for PIEs, and a tailored purpose for the differential requirements in the ISQMs and ISAs. So we have tailored slightly what is in the IAASB code to make it relevant to the heightened expectations of stakeholders regarding the audit engagement itself. So things like the involvement of an engagement quality control reviewer and some of the transparency and communications with those charged with governance are part of the broader expectations of the audit engagements, not just relating to independence. Next slide, please. Next piece is on the definitions of PIE and publicly traded entity. So what we have done after due review is adopted the definition of PIE and publicly traded entity in ISQM 1, ISA 200, and the IAASB's glossary of terms. We have adapted the entire approach from the, All right, thank you. Sorry, I'm back. Okay, so we have adopted the entire approach from the IAASB code with regard to scoping public interest entities, and we have broadly, with one exception, replaced the definition of listed entities with publicly traded entity. So there's very strong alignment there with what's in the IAASB code. Next slide, please. So the differential requirements in the ISQMs and the ISAs, we undertook a case-by-case analysis of each of the existing differential requirements, and those are those that extend the requirements for at the moment for listed entities. And the proposal is to extend the differential requirements to apply to PIEs for engagement quality reviews, communication with those charged with governance about the firm's system of quality management, communicating auditor independence, communicating key audit matters, and communicating the name of the engagement partner. The one piece where I referenced that we haven't addressed in the extension to PIEs is the differential requirements in ISA 720, so other information. And the proposal there is to defer that discussion until that standard is comprehensively revised. There are a number of practical issues that need to be looked at in relation to that standard. Next slide, please. And then the revisions to ISRA 2400 revised, which is the review of historical financial information. So part 4A of the IAASB code also applies to review engagements. So we have looked at amending ISRA 2400 to address the transparency about the relevant ethical requirements for independence that have been applied for certain entities, to make sure that it is consistent and coherent with the IAASB code and consistent with the auditing standards. The outreach that we did showed that the reviews of historical financial information for listed and public interest entities is very rare. In fact, I think we only came up with one example. So the amendments that we are proposing to ISRA 2400 are quite limited in relation to that. Next slide, please. So I think that, Jim, is the overview of what we've got. Obviously, the CAG has had all the supporting material and papers. So our questions really for yourselves are obviously for your views on the ED, the material that's been presented, and the changes that we are proposing. And then there's obviously the question 2 is the due process question, which is about anything else. So, Jim, I don't know whether you want to take the two together or whether you want to do them separately. Happy to go with whatever you prefer.
Well, let's maybe we'll take the two together and let's see what the comments are. Thank you, Sue, for presenting that to us. Any comments from the CAG? Daniel, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Just to say that this project is of a special interest for Latin America, especially since the size of our capital markets, is very small, and many large and complex companies are not on stock market. So I think the definition of PIE has caused problems due to the difference between the IAS and the IASB Code of Ethics. So this project will greatly help standard setters in the countries of the region. So I'm very grateful for this project. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Daniel. Let's see. Akihito, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. So thank you very much for your presentation. I have 2 comments. Firstly, I understand that the revision of the definition of PIE is currently under consideration in each jurisdiction in accordance with IASB code revision. it is important for IAASB to consider when IAASB will start this public consultation of this exposure draft, given this situation, in order to obtain useful inputs, views from a wide range of stakeholders globally. The second point is regarding ISQM1. Compliance with ISQM1, or at least as demanding, is also required when sustainability assurance engagements are performed in accordance with ISSA 5000 as well. ISSA 5000 is now being developed as a professional agnostic standard. Therefore, it is also crucial to obtain various inputs from a wide range of stakeholders in the area of sustainability assurance, including assurance providers other than professional accountants as well. That's my comment. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Akihito. Kachito, welcome. Whoops, Kachito, we may have lost your, or you may be on mute.
Thank you. It's evening where I am. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate very much this project, and I would like to say that having mentioned it by the presenter, the significance of the varying jurisdictional requirements and laws are that matter is very important, and how to present it and how these things will play will be something for the regulators. So at the end of the day, it may be a matter of professional judgment on the part of the practitioner. But I am pleased that this that the project is mindful of that. That is very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Kachita. Sue, it looks like you have support. Let me see if I have anyone else have a comment on either question 1 or 2 for Sue. Sue, I think I'll take that as support for this project.
Thank you. That's a very nice start to the week, or for the board week. Obviously, there's a couple of points, Akihito, that you raised that I think are definitely things for us to consider. The piece about broader stakeholder input. Obviously, this will be being issued for consultation, so we will look there. And your point about the coordination with IAASB and the work that they're doing around the jurisdictional piece. And I think, Conchita, you said something very similar. We recognise how important that is, and it's. I'll just say that it's quite hard to incorporate the different layers of where people present some of the definitions in this piece. But we've certainly been working hard to respect the fact that a lot of this material will be set at jurisdictional level.
I think that'd be good for going into the full board meeting next week with this information. Sue, anything else from
James?
Oh, Sandra.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having a hard time. I can't raise my hand. I don't know what's going on with my Zoom app, so apologies for that, for cutting in, raising my hand, putting stuff in the chat. One of the things that came up from a public interest perspective was the revisions in ISA 260 to remove the requirement to communicate fee-related matters in ISA 260, and it's now placed in the external materials. And our concern is that it may weaken this standard, but we understand that in certain jurisdictions that's already required. but I think that we wanted to just put that out there as a consideration as a part of the CAG and for the board as it discusses the issue next week.
Thanks, Sandra. And we'll go back and sort of relook at that. But I think my understanding is that the fee matter wasn't originally in the IAASB code, and it now is. So so our feeling was that it's in with a number of other pieces of information in the IAASB code. So it's probably more comprehensively dealt with there than it was previously, where it was just picked up in ISA 260. But obviously, I'll go back.
Yeah, if we could just go back and look
Yeah.
at how that all works together, it would be useful. I think the concern was that it was in application materials in ISA 260, and I'm not sure in the interrelationship and the enforceability between what's in the IAASB standards and what's in the application materials related to that item. Just something to think through that came across in our review of the changes.
Thank you.
Maybe, Sue, I can just add to that. So a little bit of the history is when the ethics board completed their fees project a couple of years ago, that was actually flagged as something that the IAASB need to look at whenever we do open up to 60. Because as Sue has indicated, with the IAASB fees project, they now have comprehensive requirements in terms of dealing with fees information and communicating with those charged with governance. So it is based on that. But Sandra, I take your point. It's probably worth just to check if the puzzle fits.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what. Well said. Well said.
And Sandra, any other comments from a PIOB perspective on this matter?
Nope. That was the one that was the most important. Yep, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments for Sue? Sue, any other final thoughts before we let you go?
No, and just to say thank you for the support. Obviously, you'll see the material as it comes through, and I'm sure that many of you are working with organisations that will be commenting on the exposure draft when it comes out. So thank you very much for the support.
Thank you, Sue. All right, well, we will continue on, and our next item is agenda item C, and we're going to have a update on the closing off. Billy, I think you're going to do that, as well as some report backs.
That's right. Thank you, Jim. So we are looking at agenda item C in respect of the close off of due process as it relates to the IAASB consultation with the CAG. So representatives, many of you are also on the IAASB CAG, so you would have gone through a similar process at the September meeting with the ethics board. So we're just now closing it off on the IAASB side as well. So in agenda item C, we just articulate that the purpose of this really is to have a smooth transition to the new Stakeholder Advisory Council, which commences as of the 1st of January 2024. And it is very important that we just make sure that, especially in relation to the projects that are still underway at the point of this meeting, which is the last CAG meeting, that all the comments from representatives are captured and duly considered by the IAASB, and also that due process as it relates to the involvement of CAG has been followed for these projects up to where each of these projects are within the project cycle. And this is really what agenda item C is documenting and putting on record. So in paragraph 5 of agenda item C, you were presented with a table that provides a summary of the projects that are still underway as of today's meeting. Just to go through that at a high level, I think the last item in that table is actually the easiest one to deal with, and that is the strategy and work plan. With respect to the strategy and work plan, the CAG due process has actually been followed in full, and the strategy and work plan following the September meeting will now be considered for approval by the board next week when the board meets in New York. So in respect of that one, the full due process has been followed. For the other projects that are still underway, you will see that there's a reference to a step in the due process and up to which step the due process has been followed up to today's meeting. Just for a little bit of background, so whenever we complete a project, we complete a due process checklist that is submitted to the PIOB. So this table reflects up to which step in that due process checklist has each of these projects progressed. With respect to the audit evidence project, this project is post-exposure. So the exposure draft for ED 500 closed in April, and the CAG will remember in September, we presented the CAG as well as the IAASB with the feedback from the exposure draft on certain key themes. And we also note specifically in that table that CAG has not been presented with all the feedback yet. It was the feedback with respect to certain key themes. So it is important that as we go into 2024, that any themes that are still outstanding where the feedback has not been shared would obviously be shared with our board, and would obviously also, to the extent that it is relevant to the new terms of reference of the Stakeholder Advisory Council, will also be considered by the Stakeholder Advisory Council. Then with respect to our other outstanding projects, I can almost pull all of those together because they have all reached the same point within the due process. So with respect to PI Track 2, based on the discussion we've just had, and then also previously in respect of fraud, going concern, and sustainability assurance, we have reached the step where the IAASB CAG has been consulted on all significant issues during the development of the exposure draft. So all those fraud and track 2 will now go into ED subsequent to the board meeting next week. Going concern has now just come back from ED, but we've not gone back to the board yet. And sustainability assurance, you are also aware that comment period only closed at the end of last week. So really with that, as we go to the Stakeholder Advisory Council in 2024, we therefore will have to provide the Stakeholder Advisory Council with a comprehensive report back document that contains all the report backs from all previous CAG meetings, including today's meeting, for all the projects that are still underway. And that will be something that will be placed on the SAC agenda for their first meeting in April next year. So that is in terms of just the close off of the due process. Part of that is obviously also just to look at the report backs on the projects that are listed there in agenda item C, and those report backs were included in agenda items C1 through to C5 in the materials that were posted for this meeting. So what I propose I will do just for record purposes is I will pause in each of them.
Yeah. Sorry.
For Christmas or not?
Yeah, actually, as it happens, this year. How are you doing? Sorry, I'm on a call. So.
Okay. So on agenda item C1 to C5, let's take them one by one. Just like I said, just for record purposes, to make sure that there's no additional matters that CAG representatives want to flag. I don't propose to work through each of them in detail, but I'll make a brief comments about each of them. So if we start on agenda item C1, which is less complex entities, as you know that in September, the board approved the ISA for LCE, and also the PIOB's public certification of the due process that was followed was issued on December 5, on Tuesday. And hopefully you all saw that yesterday we actually published the final standard. So the final standard was published yesterday together with the basis for conclusions and some other implementation support materials like a fact sheet. We published an FAQ, and we also published a standard slide deck that can be used by our stakeholders for awareness raising as well as adoption and implementation purposes. There's also some other implementation support materials that will also follow and still follow in 2024. But apart from that, there was nothing specifically I wanted to point out in the report back table that you see in agenda item C1. But Jim, I'm happy to just pause there if there's anything on the LCE project.
Yes, let's have a pause to see if there's anything. Any comments on LCE project? Really not seeing any. Why don't we move on?
I see now a hand from Paul Thompson.
Oh,
And indeed you do. Apologies, I'm sort of sitting on a train here, just in transit. Yeah, just congratulations on hearing the PIOB approval for the ISA for LCE. Clearly going forward, the big challenge is going to be that of maximising adoption and effective implementation of the standard. So IFA for SMEs, we look forward to working with IFAC and others to help promote the standard in Europe. So congratulations on that achievement to the IAASB team.
thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul. Right, moving on to the next one, agenda item C2, that is the report back on the audit evidence project. So as I indicated previously, in September, the CAG representatives were presented with the feedback that we received on ED 500, as well as the Audit Evidence Task Force initial proposals on certain key items, which also included certain options. For example, you will remember there was an option that different options that were presented in terms of how to deal with responses on the conditional requirement to obtain audit evidence about the accuracy and completeness of information. So based on the feedback that we received from the CAG, we also had the board's meeting immediately the week after the CAG meeting in September. And the Audit Evidence Task Force has since progressed those themes and are presenting them at the meeting next week to the board, together with proposed drafting in terms of updating proposed ISA 500 revised. As you can see in the report back in in agenda item C2, that table covers 6 pages, so there was quite a comprehensive discussion at the CAG in September. And you can see we've really noted all those items. And like I said, many of those items have now been progressed and are reflected in the board materials that are going to the board next week. But again, there wasn't anything specific that I wanted to point out. So Jim, I'm happy to pause here for purposes of the audit evidence project.
Yes, anyone have a hand or comment on the audit evidence project? Let me double check to make sure I don't have a hand here, Lily.
Yeah, I also don't see any.
I don't see any. Rod.
Right, so agenda item C3, the fraud project, our project to revise ISA 240. So the version of the standard that the CAG saw in September was actually the second iteration of the full draft of the standard. So the board saw a full draft of the standard at the June meeting. Based on the input from the board, that was turned. So the CAG in September saw a second version of the proposed standard together with the board in the week following. And that was discussed at the CAG meeting in September. The CAG provided input on a number of areas as reflected in agenda item C3, including some of the more prominent areas like the new section in the standard that deals with fraud or suspected fraud, as well as the section on transparency regarding the auditor's work related to fraud in the auditor's report. Based on the feedback received from the CAG meeting and the IAASB meeting in September, the task force has now turned that document, and we are presenting the board with a final draft for the approval of the exposure draft during the board meeting next week. So again, Jim, happy to pause for any observations or questions around the fraud project.
Yes, Billy, I think there were some comments at our previous meeting, but overall there was support for the fraud standard moving forward, notwithstanding any additional work that was done. That was my sense. Anyone have any comments on the fraud? Again, I don't see any hands. So my sense from a CAG perspective is there is support for that particular standard going to the board meeting next week. Let's talk about the big one now. Sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability. So agenda item C4, you will see this report back looks completely different than the others because the session in the September meeting was completely different from any other CAG session. So you will remember after the approval of the exposure draft ED 5000 at the June IAASB meeting, we issued the exposure draft in early August. So therefore we decided to actually use the CAG session in September as a mini roundtable. So representatives, CAG representatives participated in that mini roundtable during the September meeting. And that was subsequently followed with a comprehensive outreach program that the IAASB followed. I hope you all saw our infographic that we released in early November that sort of summarizes all the wonderful outreach activities that we've been doing, which included 4 global roundtables, as well as 4 regional in-partnership events, with which we covered 8 cities across the world. And we also had some direct meetings with individual stakeholders and representative groups. And then obviously the big one is we had our public consultation through our exposure draft process, and that consultation closed on the 1st of December last week, Friday. So the input that we received from the CAG, from that mini roundtable and all the other outreach that I've just highlighted will now all be considered as part of the overall feedback as the project team and the Sustainability Assurance Task Force starts to look at that feedback, starts to identify themes and develop proposals in terms of working towards finalization of the standard. So, Jim, because that was a mini roundtable, it was not really in this, for this document about report back on each comment that was made. It was more that will go into the overall feedback that we've received. But again, happy to pause on sustainability and take any final observations that the CAG may have on the sustainability project.
I know you had what, some 27 questions on the draft, and I know the time period just closed. Do you think you had a good response? Do you know yet?
Yeah, so we actually are busy sort of now slicing and dicing all the responses to see what we've received. But at a very high level, I can indicate that we had 140, I think it's 142 now, because I think there was one more that came in yesterday. So we're up to 142 responses. And what was also very nice from a perspective of how we're going to analyze the comments is that 74% of our respondents actually use the response template that we encourage our respondents to use, which will definitely help with the analysis of the comments. But yeah, so again, 142, very good representation across all constituency groups and also geographically.
That's good. I do see a hand. Hilda?
Yes, thank you very much, Willie, and congratulations on such a high number of comment letters, which potentially is the highest ever. I don't know, but I think it's actually very good, and also first sight from a wide variety of stakeholders. Now, you will not be surprised if I say in the European Union, this ISSA 5000 on sustainability assurance is of great importance to us, as from 2024 there is mandatory limited assurance that comes in on the first vague of mandatory sustainability reports. Now, I'm looking forward, and the next steps that we know from the IAASB is that you plan to have a final standard by September 2024. We very much hope that that is still the plan. But my question is really, do you plan any, I would say, not outreach, but communication as to how your progress is going on finalizing the standard. And why do I ask this question? We are in the period now where the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, is being implemented in Europe. Today, France is the first country that published their implementation, and they have, as far as the sustainability assurance standard, they have a guidance and they might go to a standard. There are many other countries currently, between now and June next year, they are discussing how they will go about whether to have a national sustainability assurance standard or not. And the European Commission will not decide before 2026. So these are now in, well, another 29 countries discussions that are going on. And a lot of them have not decided what they will do. They might look at ISAE 3000, they might look at the draft of the ISSA 5000, or they might do nothing. But we consider that in order to inform those discussions, it would be very good that not only by scrolling through IAASB board papers, but by having more public and summarized communications on the steps that you're taking. I think that would be very helpful to inform the CSRD implementation in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilda. Tom, I see your hand is up.
So good morning, all. Thank you, Hilda, for that piece of advice. Just one thing to supplement with Lily, while we have a near record level of comment letters submitted, our consultations also included, as you know, the roundtables and a number of outreach events and a survey. So but by the time it's all done, we would say that we probably have engaged at least 250 to 300 organizations in some form of comment process. So that's really important. And we've hit every continent throughout the world. As a result of, as it relates to Hilda's comment, yes, as you know, we've been very intense in terms of the means of communication following this throughout this whole project. And in particular, we're having a first discussion of feedback we received from the roundtables, not the comment letters, at our board meeting next week. And I assume one element of that is the need to continue to communicate. My intention too is, as we have throughout the process, is to have elements of like workshopping with key regulatory stakeholders. We've met very frequently with the European Commission and other European stakeholders as it relates to Europe, but also all the members of the monitoring group throughout. That is our intent throughout this process, and we clearly understand the timetable in Europe. We are firmly committed to our current timetable, which is with a completion date of September 2024. That gives us some time to make sure that it is out in 2024. So one element is too, we have to make sure that PIOB is ready to go to approve in this calendar year if we're to submit it to them after the 2024 September meeting. So Josephine, do you want to add on top of that?
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's spot on, and yes, that's right. We fully intend to communicate throughout the process, Hilda. The other thing as well that you and I have talked about previously is that throughout all that outreach that we've done so far, one of the biggest calls is for education. And so our intention as well is, as we're developing the standard, to also develop our educational material alongside our work. So it's not here's the standard and then here's your educational guidance a year later. We're trying to make sure that we put those out as closely together as we possibly can. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
I thought I saw another hand up, but maybe someone put it down. Okay, Billy, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. And that brings us to the last item, agenda item C5, which is the report back on the strategy and work plan. So in September, the CAG representatives were provided an overview of the feedback that we received on the public consultation on our draft strategy and work plan, and was also presented with an updated draft of the strategy section of the strategy and work plan based on the feedback that we've received, and the initial views of the planning committee to help and to give us direction in terms of the programming decisions that we had to make in finalizing the work plan. That same information was obviously also discussed at the IAASB meeting in September. In Q4, we also continued with our outreach on the strategy and work plan, which involved, amongst other parties, the PIOB. Obviously, the PIOB has a very strong interest in what are the projects that go into our strategy and work plan. And so we consulted specifically with the PIOB, as well as the monitoring group and other regulators, which included IAASB Committee 1, the Accounting and Audit Expert Group of Basel, and the CEOB. So what you see in the report back in agenda item C5, we've also articulated specific decisions that have been taken in respect of the points that were raised by the CAG representatives in September in terms of what we are presenting to the board in December now in our board meeting next week in relation to the updated draft of the strategy and work plan. So Jim, I'm happy to pause there and take any questions or observations on the strategy and work plan.
Thank you, William. I know we've had a number of discussions on strategy and work plan throughout the year. Any additional comments? I don't see any hands up for this one. Really, I think that was your last report back.
That's it. Thank you, Jim.
Any other comments? I'll just open it up for anything that was covered this morning before I go to some closing thoughts. I don't see any. So again, as mentioned in September, I'd like to thank all the CAG representatives for their contributions throughout the duration of the CAG, and I really appreciate your participation and efforts, and I know our voice was heard. Tom, I see you in a room here. Do you have any final thoughts for the CAG as we move on?
Well, first of all, just a big thank you again. Thank you for being drafted into service one more time to help us fulfill our due process as we come to some key decision points. For those of you who are not officially engaged with us beyond this year's term, I really ask you to stay in touch and continue to follow us and provide advice and input throughout. We're trying to be more open and make it easier to engage with us through lots of different channels, so please do. Jim, I just want to state on the record again how much we all appreciate you at the IAASB and the amount of effort you've put in. I know we've had a formal recognition at the meeting. One of the things that we have for you is that your colleagues on this council wanted to express their appreciation for you, and we've aggregated a number of their notes of thanks to you and appreciation, and we'll send you that link through our kudos board on this. So first of all, for those who haven't added to it, we'll reminder to add to it, but for Jim, we'll send that to you, and we'll get to celebrate you a little bit more when you get to New York next week with the full board. So thank you all. Have a great day, and much appreciation for your input to the IAASB.
Thank you, Tom. Sandra, any comments as we close off?
No, I think the summary of the close off of the projects was well done and understandable. And I too appreciate all the CAG's comments over time, having been a member, and our organization having been a member, and appreciate all your efforts, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, for this meeting, the minutes will be circulated via email, as well as a report back on the Track 2 will also be sent via email. And with that, I will close the meeting. Thank you. I wish everyone a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.